Hey guys, my name is Isaac and today we're going to go through scrapers. Essentially, we're going to go through the 3 different scraping mechanisms there are out there and some scraping tools. I'm just going to use the tools as an example. But if you're running a lead gen agency, you know how important it is to understand the mechanisms and you have to understand what kind of tools there would be out there, right? Also, if you're running a business yourself, it's also important for you to understand this because then you can actually find out what kind of scraping tool that you would use and what kind of mechanism that would work the best for your workflow. So with that being said, let's get straight to it. When we talk about scrapers, we have essentially 3 types of scrapers out there. We have the pre-scrape data, we have the live scrapers, and then we have the custom code scrapers, right? Essentially, it's not the same thing as a scraping tool. We're going to get into that. And I'm also going to go through the differences and the disadvantages and advantages of each individual scraping types out there. So if we start with the pre-scrape data, you would find, the popular tools like Apollo.io, we have Lead Finder, we have Instantly, we have something like Lucia, which is a little bit different, but it still goes into the category of pre-scrape data. And then we have a niche product like Targetron, which is only focusing on the local businesses, right? So if we take a look at a tool like Apollo, you might want to ask, how are they getting their leads, right? So it's done through pre-scrape data. So by saying that, I mean that at some point their developers were like, hey, let's go into LinkedIn and scrape their entire data, right? So they built scrapers that would actually scrape their LinkedIn's entire database and put them into their data sheet. And you might want to ask, why are we using Apollo then? Why are we not just using LinkedIn? So before they actually go in and scrape the database of LinkedIn and put them into their own, they're actually scraping their entire profile and tagging each profile, right? And each business as well. So they're doing like multiple tags, which allows something like Apollo to have like multiple filters out there. So if you look at, let's just say LinkedIn Sales Navigator, there are some very awkward filters that just doesn't make sense. And Apollo, you can filter, in keywords, you can filter like more specific roles or so many other things that you can actually do with it. That's why a tool like Apollo, D7 Lead Finder and so on comes in quite handy. However, there are some other advantages with them. There are also the fact that you can actually instantly scrape them. So that's also quite cool when you compare them to the other scrapers that we're going to go through in a second. So let's just say that you have a client and he's like, I need these leads tomorrow. You can actually do that with these tools out here, right? You won't be needing to wait for like days and sometimes weeks, right? You might also want to ask, what are some of the disadvantages? Well, as you can kind of guess, if Apollo has different scraping tools out there that would actually scrape the database of, let's just say, LinkedIn and put them into their own, at some point you're actually going to run across like leads that hasn't been updated. So you can actually notice that some of these individual has changed company, some of them has deleted some posts. So if you're going to use them, for example, cold calling or cold emailing, you're going to actually notice it's going to be a little bit awkward, but it doesn't happen all the time. It's just a precaution so you know that it's there, right? Also, one thing to think about is that these tools out there, I'm not going to point in names, would actually say and advertise themselves as they're scraping all the time, but they're not. It won't actually be possible to scrape all the time because that would cost a fortune, right? The thing is that you would actually realize that there are some data that's been outdated and that's just one of the disadvantages, but there are still many advantages out there, like for example, the time and the filter system, right? As I mentioned to you. So those would be the pre-scrape data, right? Now we're going to go through the live scrapers. So before moving further, guys, I just want to clarify one thing. I'm not going to go too much in depth with each individual tools in this video. I would be having a separate video in my Skool community for this. I just recently created a Skool community, so you can go in and check the videos out, and also you can ask any questions you would like. I would be very responsive there. So with that being said, let's go to the next part. When it comes to live scrapers, we have infinite tools out there. These are just a few. We have Boot, Prospeo, Wizard, we have Outscraper, we have Find Email, we have Drop Contact. There's tons out there, okay? But you can essentially divide them into 2 categories. You have the dependent one and the independent one. So something like Outscraper doesn't need like an extra layer. You can actually just go into Outscraper and just start scraping, right? And then it would take some time, obviously. And then you have something like Boot, Prospeo, which is like a cheaper version of Boot, and they're essentially the same thing. Huge competition between each other, and Wizard does the same thing. They're all dependent, and what I mean by dependent is that they're dependent on another database. In that case, that would be something like ZoomInfo or LinkedIn Sales Navigator. So you would actually recognize once you use these dependent live scrapers, they're going to tell you to download their extension, so you can actually go in and export a huge list of leads, and then you put them into their software, and then you can actually extract them from there. There are a lot of tools out there, and all of them are actually very, very different. Like some of them are more complicated than the other. Prospero is quite straightforward. We have something like Wizard, which is a little bit more comprehensive. They would actually go into their website, actually make some other metrics and align them, and then try to find their email. There's a lot of tools out there. The point is that the advantages here are, as you can guess, that you're gonna get fresh scrape live data, right? It's actually them, and you've gotten like their most recent companies, their most recent history and so on. So your emails won't come out that awkwardly. There are also some disadvantages with tools like these. Usually they're quite pricey depending on how their mechanisms are. And then the second thing is that it would take some time. Something like Outscraper can maybe take a day or 2 days. When it comes to these guys here, every single of these has some kind of odd limitation, right? So Wizard, for example, you can only export 30,000 per year. And then you have something like Prospeo where it says like, okay, you've exported 5,000 a day. We are not allowing you to export more than 5,000, and their support doesn't give a F. So we have something like EvaBoot, which is gonna trigger something in Sales Navigator that's gonna tell you that, hey, we can see that you've been too much active. We're just gonna give you a day or two to kind of go through this. So there are some awkward limitations in each of them. I would definitely recommend to do your research on them before picking the right one for yourself, right? So those would be the live scrapers. Now we're going to go through the last one, which is the custom code scrapers. Believe it or not, these are the best if you want to get very, very specific data. So for example, that could be that, hey, I want you to scrape Trustpilots that are within this category, within this field that has mentioned this and that. So you can make it very, very specific with custom code scrapers. They're very, very useful, but there are 3 main disadvantages. First of all, if you're not a developer, it's quite pricey. The second thing is that, let's just say if you're trying to scrape Instagram emails, right? Some of these Instagram accounts has their emails and you want to scrape that and you want to use a custom scraper for that. If Instagram just changes like some bits in their infrastructure, you would have to go into the code again and find out, okay, where am I actually going wrong, and actually changing and adjusting that. Third part would be that it's actually not that useful if you're not the developer. And even if you are the developer, it's kind of an annoying thing to go in and, adjust this all the time and play around with it. And then, you can have, if you need somebody else to use it, then it's being problematic as well, because you need like an entire onboarding onto that. Basically, at some point, you're going to be tired of the custom scraper and you're just going to be like, F it, I don't care anymore. So yeah, those were essentially the 3 different types of scrapers out there. I hope that you've gotten some knowledge out of it. If you like this video, yeah, like and subscribe, and also go ahead and follow my Skool. I just recently created one. I'm quite new at it, but in there you would be able to find so much more about these scrapers with tools that I would recommend using in what kind of use case scenarios, and also just essentially much more guides out there. Thank you.